When Doctor Who was first created, home media wasn't really a thing. Television was meant to be screened once and that was it. After broadcast, it was considered economically useless. So, when it came time to reuse old tapes or make room for new programs, previous episodes were either junked or wiped. In the mid-1980s, when home media was becoming popular, the BBC saw old Doctor Who as a good source of revenue, only to discover previous episodes had been wiped. When the complete guide to the BBC archives was released in 1981, fans were in shock. But since that time, there has been a lot of discoveries. So let's start our journey by looking into each individual serial and see what exists, where a print could be, behind the scenes facts, and the best way to watch it today. Our first missing serial is Marco Polo. The Doctor and his travelling companions Barbara, Ian and Susan land in 1289 Central Asia. The team joined Marco Polo's caravan from the roof of the world in the plains of Pamir to the palace of Kublai Khan. Sadly, all 7 episodes are missing from the BBC archive. So, what still exists in the BBC archive? 2 individuals recorded the episode's soundtrack on first broadcast. These 2 people were David Holman and James Russell. Holman's recording of episode 7 is missing about 10 seconds, but due to Russell's recording, we have that 10 seconds restored. Telly Snaps are essentially screenshots of the original broadcast. Marco Polo's Telly Snaps were discovered by Derek Hanley in 2004, for they were in the possession of the director, Waris Hussein. Although, episode 4 is missing their Telly Snaps. There is a record that says episode 4 was photographed at the time, so they still could be out there. An Australian fan took 8 off-screen photos from episodes 6 and 7. Sadly, no surviving footage exists of Marco Polo. Yet thankfully, Marco Polo is blessed with a large collection of photos, which many are in stunning colour. There were 9 prints of Marco Polo that were biked around to different countries. This map displays where they last ended up. Many film cans went to other countries first. Let's look at number 7, which is the most frustrating one as an example. Number 7 started in Nigeria, where the first episode of Marco Polo aired on the 2nd of November 1965. It was possibly sent to Ghana or Kenya. Either way, they were returned to Nigeria for further reruns. In the mid-1990s, a station in Africa contacted the BBC and asked if they wanted the complete seasons of 1 and 2 of Doctor Who back, which is highly possible Marco Polo was in this set, and the BBC staffer said no. Copies of Marco Polo could exist in Thailand or Ethiopia, due to their destruction not being confirmed. Canada's copies were most likely junked by the CBC, but no official documentation has been found as of yet. During the production of Marco Polo, a little bit of drama was going on. Doctor Who was to be featured on the cover of Radio Times during the transmission of Marco Polo, yet not everyone involved was so happy. William Russell, who played Ian Chesterton, complained that the cover omitted the regular TARDIS crew, and instead it featured Hartnell with 2 guest stars. He was also upset with the last-minute changes to scripts. Episode 4 of Marco Polo added 6 whole minutes worth of lines the day before recording. Verity Lambert, the producer, acknowledged this complaint and assured them that they would have more notice to any future changes. So, what's the best way of viewing Marco Polo right now? Well, there is a few different ways. There is the official BBC reconstruction, which is available as part of the beginning DVD box set. This version, however, has been cut down to 30 minutes, instead of reconstructing the entire 7-part serial. There are 2 versions of the loose cannon reconstruction, LC-17, which is the original full-colour reconstruction, and the updated LC-39, which contains the rediscovered Telly Snaps, and is in black and white. In 2003, BBC Radio released a remastered audio version with narration by William Russell. A novelisation by Target Books was released in 1985. As of the publishing date of this video, there has been no official animation. Let's talk Telly Snaps. During the early days of television, most programs like Doctor Who weren't kept forever and generally transmitted live. In 1947, a man named John Cura contacted the BBC with a seemingly odd request. Since leaving the RAF, I have made numerous experiments to photograph images on my television screen, but with very little success. I have now built a camera entirely to my own design, and which I think you will agree gives pretty good photographs. After some deliberation over copyright, the BBC granted him permission to do so. Producers and actors generally seeked out Cura to have a record of their own work. Upon his death in 1969, his widow offered the entire collection of Telly Snaps to the BBC, which, as you guessed it, turned it down. It has been assumed that these were destroyed. Luckily, many copies exist through private collections and production files. Our second missing serial is The Reign of Terror. The TARDIS team land in 1794 just outside Paris, at one of the most deadliest times in Parisian history. The team get caught up in a plot surrounding James Sterling and are not entirely safe from the clutches of Madame Guillotine. Unfortunately, episodes 4 and 5 are missing from the archive. So, what still exists? David Holman has a high-quality audio recording of the original broadcast, although about a minute of audio is missing from episode 4, The Tyrant of France. James Russell's recording is used to fill in the missing gap from that episode. Unfortunately, the Telly Snaps of the serial have not been found, and their original existence has not been recorded. There is a chance they were never taken in the first place. Luckily, a small selection of 8mm off-air recordings were made by a 60s Doctor Who fan from Australia. These recordings come from episodes 4 and 5. 8 film prints were made of The Reign of Terror. Episodes 1, 2, 3 and 6 were recovered from Cyprus in 1984 by Paul Veneers and Ian Levine. Episode 4 and 5 were assumed to be lost in a local civil war. Copies of Reign of Terror could exist in Thailand and Ethiopia due to the uncertainty in documentation, but are most likely junked. Nigeria also suffers from the same fate as Marco Polo, and its existence is still uncertain. Uncertainty is a common theme within The Reign of Terror, not just in the archive, but also on set in 1964. During the production of The Reign of Terror, it was clear that Doctor Who's future was uncertain. William Hartnell and William Russell were getting offers for other work, and Verity was unsure if she was allowed to extend contracts, because she didn't know how much longer the show had. Thankfully, the show thrived onwards. At this time, Verity and David Whittaker also discussed writing out Barbara and Susan, and replacing them with other characters. Thankfully, Barbara was saved, but poor Susan was not. So, what's the best way of experiencing The Reign of Terror? The Reign of Terror's missing episodes were animated by Planet 55 and Big Finish in 2013 and is available on DVD. Loose Cannon have also created 2 reconstructions for Reign of Terror, LC12 and the updated LC37. A narrated audio version by Caroline Ford was released in 2006 and re-released in 2010. The Reign of Terror was novelized in 1987. Our third missing serial is The Crusade. The TARDIS arrives in Palestine in the 12th century during the fight between King Richard and Saladin. Barbara is kidnapped and the team must rescue her from the city of Jaffa before it is too late. Episodes 2 and 4 are missing from the archives. So, what still exists of The Crusade? David Holman's audio is the highest quality recording of The Crusade, and a copy by James Russell exists also. Sadly, no surviving clips exist of the missing episodes. George Galicio, a production assistant during the 1970s, kept the Telly Snaps for all 4 episodes when they were being thrown out of the Doctor Who production office. At first glance, it may seem like there's not much left of The Crusade, but due to episode 1 and 3 still surviving, we still get quite a good view of what could have been. 6 prints of The Crusade were created and taken to a variety of countries. Australia destroyed their copies. New Zealand originally claimed that episodes 2, 3 and 4 were junked in 1974, but episode 1 was kept by film collectors and passed on throughout the years. Its final resting place was part of a private collection by Bruce Grenville and was returned to the BBC in 1999. Mauritius and Sierra Leone returned theirs to the BBC. The Crusade could exist in Ethiopia or Nigeria, but more likely they were destroyed. Does The Crusade excite you? Well, William Hartnell felt as if some people were a little too excited. Bill found the original script to imply an incestuous relationship between King Richard and his sister Joanna.
Disgusting!
They complied with his complaints and removed the suggested material. One scene required ants to crawl up Ian's arm. William Russell refused to appear in this, and Victor Ratellis, a production assistant, did it for him. So, what's the best way to experience The Crusade today? As of this video, no official BBC animation of the serial has been made. When the episodes were released on VHS, William Russell appeared in character as Ian Chesterton in a special recorded segment to explain what happens in the missing episodes. Fun fact, it was recorded at Ian Levine's house. This special recorded segment is also included in the Lost in Time box set alongside the 2 surviving episodes. Loose Cannon has 2 reconstructions, LC-14 and the updated LC-33. A narrated audio release by William Russell was released in 2005 and re-released in 2010. The original novelization was released in 1965 under the title The Crusaders. Our 4th missing serial is Galaxy 4. The Doctor and his friends must decide who is on the right side, the beautiful Dravens or the disgusting Reals. If they choose incorrectly, it could spell the end for the Travellers. Sadly, only episode 3 exists in the BBC archive. So, what does exist? David Holman's recordings are of the highest quality for this episode, and were also recorded by Alan Wilson and James Russell. Episode 3 was in possession of Terry Burnett, who was unaware of its missing status in the BBC archive, and had it stored in their personal archive since the 80s. A copy was produced in 2011 when a friend and Doctor Who fan, Ralph Montague, brought up Doctor Who. The final 30 seconds and the end credits were missing from this print. This serial also contains the longest surviving clip from missing episodes. 6 whole minutes of episode 1 was kept by a fan, John Vincent Rudsky, after creating a documentary titled Who's Doctor Who, and the clip was given to them to use in the program. 10 seconds of off-air recordings were created by an Australian fan in the 60s, which also exists in the BBC archive. 3 prints of Galaxy 4 were shipped out. Australia returned their copy to the BBC in 1975. The 2011 rediscovered episode 3 was most likely the Australian print. Sierra Leone returned their print also. Galaxy 4 could possibly exist in Singapore, but more than likely it was destroyed. It wasn't just on the planet's surface where tension was bubbling. Verity Lambert was in the process of handing over the show to John Wiles, and with the original director Mervyn Pinfield falling ill and being replaced by Derek Martinius, it all became a bit too much for everyone involved. It didn't help that the main cast disliked William M's script. It apparently got to a point where John Wiles threatened to fire William Hartnell on the spot. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Peter Purves has famously said that the original script was intended for the Doctor, Ian, Barbara and Vicky, and he was lumped with the lines written for Barbara. He felt as if this was very out of character and was very vocal about this. So, what's the best way of viewing Galaxy 4 today? The surviving episode Airlock, which is episode 3, was released as a bonus feature in the special edition of the Aztecs, and alongside it was a cut-down version of the other 3 episodes. If you don't care for 100% accuracy, the cut-down version is a joy to watch. If you're looking for what was exactly transmitted without any cuts, Loose Cannon's Galaxy 4 Recon is what you're looking for. It was reconstructed in 1999 as LC-11. The BBC cut-down version was made by Derek Hanley, who is part of the Loose Cannon reconstruction team. Their original cut was of all 4 episodes, so an updated Loose Cannon reconstruction of Galaxy 4 exists, but it's unavailable to be released to the public due to copyright. The audio version narrated by Peter Purves was released in 1999 and re-released in 2010. It was novelized as Galaxy 4 in 1986. Let's talk audio recordings. Thankfully, all copies of the missing episode soundtrack exist in the archive. But how is that? We can thank a bunch of enthusiastic Doctor Who fans from the 1960s for that. Some recordings were made by simply holding a microphone to the television set, and others, like Graham Strong, created other methods to record the audio signal directly to their reel-by-reel recorder. Graham's recordings are considered the highest quality due to his ingenious method. Graham Strong recorded from the Daleks Master Plan to the Dominators. A few episodes he missed, or even wiped. He deleted his copies of the Celestial Toymaker and the Gunfighters, finding them both to be silly. Many years later, Graham approached the BBC to see if they were interested in his recordings, and they turned him away. Thankfully, a few months later, Graham's friend Stephen Cranford put together a sample tape, which eventually ended in the hands of Paul Veneers, who worked on restoring Doctor Who for the home media market. In 1994, the BBC finally thanked Graham by giving him a courtesy tour of the BBC studios. David Holman's high-quality recordings were sitting in a memorabilia shop up until 1995, unaware of their importance. His recordings were especially important due to the fact they covered the earlier Hartnell stories, such as Marco Polo. For up to that point, they only existed in low quality. David Holman also had a copy of The Celestial Toymaker, which was white by Graham Strong. Brian Pierce, upon discovering these, emailed a fellow Doctor Who fan, Alan Groves, who emailed Richard Devellin. Eventually, the group convinced David Holman to loan the BBC the tapes so they could get a copy for the archive. David was also thanked with a courtesy tour of the BBC studios. Our fifth missing serial is Mission to the Unknown. An agent from the Space Security Service is investigating reports of a Dalek saucer sighting, only to discover a base on Kemball teeming with life. This is only the beginning of the Daleks' master plan. Sadly, this singular episode story is missing in its entirety. So, what does exist? The highest quality audio for Mission to the Unknown was by David Butler. Butler's recordings were limited due to financial issues because he was a schoolboy at the time. He chose to record episodes which he felt were important. Alan Wilson and David Holman also recorded the story, but the quality is not as great as Butler's. Sadly, there are no surviving clips or Telly Snaps that exist of this story. We have no surviving images of the main space security agents, so we don't know what their costumes look like. Loose Cannon used the suits from the Sontaran experiment as a base for their reconstruction. 2 prints of Mission to the Unknown were made. Mysteriously, both prints are unaccounted for. The Australian print was never broadcast, so it is likely that it was either returned or destroyed. But there is a small possibility Mission to the Unknown was aired in Singapore in 1972. Internationally, Doctor Who is generally bought in blocks. This means you don't just buy one serial, you buy a few. Singapore bought 85 individual episodes, but the block only contained 84, according to the BBC. It makes sense that Mission to the Unknown was included as an extra episode due to the fact that the block contained Galaxy 4 and the Mythmakers. It would also make sense if they aired Mission to the Unknown in its rightful spot, but according to BBC documentation, they never sold Mission to the Unknown to them. Curious. Behind the scenes, William Hartnell was about to embark on a mission to the unknown of his own, with a new producer at the reins. This episode was Verity's last credit as producer and handed over the position to John Wiles, who was probably quite happy Bill didn't appear in this episode due to their rocky relationship. Meanwhile, since the Daleks were so popular, Terry Nation used Mission to the Unknown to lay groundwork for a potential spin-off, yet it never quite panned out. In 2010, Big Finish released an audio adaptation of the pilot episode that was based on the synopsis of the script under the title The Destroyers. So, what's the best way of viewing Mission to the Unknown today? As of this video, there has been no official animation of Mission to the Unknown, although an unofficial animated reconstruction funded by Ian Levine was leaked a while ago when he tried to sell it to the BBC, who turned it down. It can be easily found online. Loose Cannon released their reconstruction in the year 2000 under LC13. They are allegedly working on an updated version with an unknown release date. An audio release, narrated by Peter Purvis, was released in 2001. It is to be released alongside the Daleks Master Plan on vinyl in 2019. This episode was novelised as part of the Daleks Master Plan story, published in 1989. Our 6th missing serial is The Mythmakers. When the TARDIS lands in Troy, 1200 BC, the Doctor is mistaken to be the god Zeus. He is forced to assist the Greek army to help invade the city of Troy. The Doctor has an ingenious idea, a giant decoy horse. But surely, that's just a myth. All 4 episodes of this serial are sadly missing. So, what does exist? The highest quality audio recordings were made by David Holman, with alternative audio by Richard Landon, who only recorded episode 4. Sadly, no Telly Snaps exists of this story, and very few photos exist. Most of the photos that have been released are of different angles of similar shots. Luckily, the Australian fan who created off-air recordings also has a few clips recorded from episodes 1, 2 and 4. In 1992, the original Trojan horse prop was found, and these photos were taken by David Howie. 3 prints of the Mythmakers were sold internationally. Australia and Sierra Leone returned their prints to the BBC, and Singapore's copy was possibly returned or junked. Its fate is currently unknown. The war between the Greeks and the Trojans was nothing compared to the conflict brewing on set. The Hartnell vs. Wiles beef was only just beginning. Maureen O'Brien's contract was nearing its renewal date, and when she returned to work after her vacation, she was shocked to find out that Mythmakers was to be her final story. She wasn't too upset over this, due to the dissatisfaction with previous scripts, e.g. Galaxy 4. Allegedly, John Wiles chose to terminate her contract due to her complaints of that serial. William Hartnell, upon hearing this news, was incredibly upset. Matters were made worse due to his failing health and frustration in the lack of things to do in his stories. So, what is the best way to view the Mythmakers? Sadly, the Mythmakers, as of this video, has not been officially animated by the BBC. Loose Cannon has reconstructed this story twice, LC03 and LC26. In 2001, a narrated audio of this story by Peter Purves was released, and was re-released in 2010. It was novelised in 1989. Our 7th missing serial is the Daleks' master plan. The Daleks, with the assistance of Marvik Chen, the guardian of the solar system, work on the creation of the Time Destructor, a device that can reverse or accelerate time to disastrous effect. Sadly, only episodes 2, 5 and 10 exist of this 12-part epic. What does exist? The best surviving audio of the Daleks' master plan are David Holman and Graham Strong's recordings. Strong's episodes of 8, 9 and 12 are considered the best, whereas Holman's recordings of the other episodes are considered higher. Although, on the 1st of January 2019, Robert Wynne donated a bunch of new audio recordings to Kaleidoscope, which are labelled the Randolph audio tapes. Mark Aries, an audio expert that's responsible for the majority of the Doctor Who audio remastering, has said that these recordings contain the reprises and the cliffhangers that were missing from the Strong tapes. Yet, the Strong tapes are sometimes superior to the Randolph tapes. Episodes 5 and 10 have been held in the archive since 1983, and episode 2 was returned in 2004. A high-quality 35mm mute film reel of 4 inserts from episode 1 exists, which was found in 1991. Another 35mm reel from episode 2 exists, was returned in 1993, after it mysteriously disappeared. Although episode 2 was returned, the 35mm footage is a higher quality than the 16mm final episode. Episode 3 has a 98-second sequence that exists, due to the clip being broadcast during a 1971 episode of Blue Peter. Episode 4 also contains a 58-second clip, also thanks to Blue Peter, but don't get too excited to thank Blue Peter yet, because episode 4 was loaned to them in 1973 and was never returned. Sadly, no Telly Snaps exists of this story, but 20 off-screen photos exist of episode 7, which were photographed by Robert Jewell, who appeared in the episode as a clown. The Daleks' master plan was only sold internationally once, and that was to Australia. Australia never aired the Daleks' master plan and was considered to be junked, or returned to the BBC. Episode 7, The Feast of Stephen, was not included in this shipment. The BBC's tape of this was wiped, meaning that this episode has no chance of returning. Episodes 5 and 10 were recovered in 1983 by Steve Bryant. Episode 2 was recovered in 2004 by Francis Watson. These prints could possibly have been sourced from the Australian copies, but could also have been the original BBC copies themselves. If they are the Australian copies, it means that these episodes could still be out there, but don't hold your breath. It's starting to get tough for Bill Hartnell, and even tougher for everyone else. John Wiles and Bill Hartnell's relationship continues to worsen. Wiles was becoming increasingly annoyed at Bill's deviations from the script, and it doesn't help that there was a short strike by the crew after Hartnell had a significant argument with his dresser. After trying to replace Bill with another actor was disapproved by the higher-ups, Wiles and the script editor, Donald Tosh, handed in their resignations. The reins were handed over to Innes Lloyd. So, how can you watch the Daleks' master plan? As of this video, the Daleks' master plan has not been officially animated. The surviving episodes are available via the Lost in Time box set. The Daleks' master plan reconstruction by Loose Cannon is incredibly impressive due to its large amount of episodes and lack of any surviving Telly Snaps. They list it as LC20. An audio narration was done by Peter Purves and released in 2001 and re-released in 2011, and is to be released alongside The Mission to the Unknown on vinyl in 2019. The Daleks' master plan novelization is split in two, Mission to the Unknown and The Mutation of Time, both released in 1989. Let's talk fan recordings. Doctor Who has had a loyal fan base from episode 1. Thanks to them, we have not only surviving audios of a high quality, but we also have off-air video recordings and off-air photographs. We mentioned recently about the off-air photos from the Daleks Master Plan episode 7, Feast of Stephen. These were not Telly Snaps made by John Cura, they were photographed by actor Robert Jewell himself. Other situations where we have off-air photos are from Marco Polo and The Evil of the Daleks, which have been discussed in their retrospective sections of this series. During the 60s, 8mm film cameras were a common household item. Carol Ann Ford brought hers along to the rehearsal of her final studio day, which can be seen in its entirety on the DVD of The Dalek Invasion of Earth. Other stories to have behind-the-scenes recordings are from The Smugglers, The Evil of the Daleks, The Abominable Snowman, and Fury from the Deep. More details on these clips are found in their sections of this series. More importantly to this video, fans used their 8mm cameras to film segments of Doctor Who on its live broadcast. This was done mainly by one unknown Australian fan. The clips are generally quite short, only a few seconds. It's assumed they were recorded on reruns, due to many of the clips being of important moments. Serials with the surviving clips include The Reign of Terror 4 and 5, Galaxy 4-1, The Mythmakers 1, 2 and 4, The Savages 3 and 4, The 10th Planet 4, The Power of the Daleks 1 and 2, The Macra Terror 3, and The Faceless Ones 3. Our 8th missing serial is The Massacre. The Doctor and Stephen land in Paris in 1572, where the two separate. Unfortunately for Stephen, he finds himself in the middle of a Huguenot plot to assassinate the Catholic Queen Mother. The Doctor can't change history, but Stephen disagrees. Sadly, all 4 episodes are missing from the archive. So, what does exist? The Graham Armstrong tapes are believed to be the most superior recording of the massacre to date, yet with the Randolph tape discovery, that could change. Although, the quality of Randolph's recordings have not been documented as of yet. Recordings were also made by David Holman and Richard Landon. Sadly, no Telly Snaps or surviving clips exist of this story. This serial is also famous for not having any photographs of William Hartnell's costume where he plays the abbot. Composites are used in the loose cannon reconstruction. In recent years, more photographs of the massacre has been found. For the opening title's captions, a background plate was used. In this set photo, we can see the camera being used to capture this moment. It's an interesting look back on how this effect would have been achieved back then, when it's so simple to do nowadays. 3 prints of the massacre were created. The Australian copy was junked by the ABC, and Sierra Leone returned their copy to the BBC. Singapore's fate is unknown, but more likely junked or returned to the BBC. The ending of the massacre was supposed to end slightly different. In the final moments of the massacre episode 4, it showed Dodo Chaplet mistaking the TARDIS for a real police box. In the original ending, it was intended for Barbara and Ian to make a cameo appearance seeing the TARDIS disappear. Sadly, that didn't come to pass and was replaced by a woman walking her dog. So, how can you view the massacre today? As of this video, there has been no official animation of the massacre. Loose Cannon have done 2 reconstructions of the story, LC16 and the brilliant LC40. The audio narration was released in 1999, narrated by Peter Purvis, and was re-released in 2003 and 2011. It was novelised as The Massacre in 1987. Our 9th missing serial is The Celestial Toymaker. The Doctor, Dodo, and Stephen find themselves in another dimension, a dimension filled with games, and if you lose, you will stay the Toymaker's prisoner for all of eternity. Fortunately, episode 4 still exists, the other 3 are missing. So, what still exists? David Holman's recordings are considered the highest quality. Richard Landon also has recordings. Interestingly enough, the recording of the final test, which is episode 4, on the Randolph tapes, includes an audio apology to the Frank Bridges estate, who claimed the character of Cyril made a striking resemblance to their character, Billy Bunter. This is yet to be released to the public. Episode 4 exists in the archive, where it was returned by ABC Australia, yet the reel was originally from Singapore. Sadly, no Telly Snaps or clips exist of the missing episodes. 3 prints were made of the Celestial Toymaker. Australia junked their copy, Sierra Leone returned theirs to the BBC, and Singapore's copy is still out there, but most likely junked. The Celestial Toymaker's game almost got rid of the Doctor. The original goal of the trilogic game was to essentially remove William Hartnell and replace him with another actor, due to his contract expiring by the end of episode 4. This, as stated earlier, did not come to pass, and that is why John Wiles handed in his resignation. If it did happen, the next story would have had Dodo and Steven being unsure if this was still the Doctor, or a game played by the Celestial Toymaker. This was essentially done in The Power of the Daleks with Polly and Ben. In episode 1, clips from the Daleks Master Plan and the Massacre are featured in the robot's monitor, so if that episode returned, we could possibly gain 2 new clips. So, what's the best way of watching the Celestial Toymaker? As of this video, the Celestial Toymaker has not been officially animated, which makes it a difficult story to view due to its reliance on imagery and action. Episode 4 can be seen on the Lost in Time box set. Loose Cannon have reconstructed this story twice, LC08 and the updated version LC36. An audio narration was released in 2001, read by Peter Purvis, and released in 2011. It was novelised as The Celestial Toymaker in 1986. Our 10th missing serial is The Savages. The Doctor and friends land in a seemingly utopian society. Underneath hides a dark secret. The Elders are draining the vitality, a sort of life force, out of the innocent people of the outer city. When the TARDIS team uncover their plot, sadly, all 4 episodes are missing from the BBC archive. What does exist? The highest quality recordings are the Graham Strong tapes, yet, due to the Randolph tapes' existence, this could soon change. David Holman and Richard Landon also have recordings. Short off-air recordings of episodes 3 and 4 were recorded by an unknown Australian fan, which gives us some glimpse into the serial. Thankfully, Telly Snaps exist of all 4 episodes. 3 copies of The Savages were created for international viewing, and we're starting to get a recurring theme here. Australia junked them, Sierra Leone kindly returned them, and we don't know the fate of Singapore's copies. Not only did it seem to be the end of The Savages copies, but also the end for Stephen Taylor. This was Stephen's final story, and Peter Purvis's contract was being extended just for this serial alone. Peter was content with this due to his lack of character development. Innes Lloyd, the producer, felt as if Stephen, as a character, wasn't very relatable and also a bit shallow, in his opinion. Jackie Lane, who played Dodo, would also find her contract ending halfway through The War Machines, which is why she doesn't appear in the final episodes to explain her absence. So, how can you watch this serial today? As of 2019, The Savages has not been officially animated by the BBC. Surviving footage can be found in the Lost in Time box set. Loose Cannon have reconstructed this story twice, LC06 and the updated version LC29. The soundtrack was released in 2001 and re-released in 2011, narrated by Peter Purvis. The Savages was novelised in 1986. Our 11th missing serial is The Smugglers. Ben and Polly stumble into the Doctor's ship as it dematerialises and lands in Cornwall in the 17th century. They find themselves in the middle of a pirate plot to uncover treasure that was hidden by Avery many years ago. Sadly, all 4 episodes are missing from the BBC archive. So, what does exist? Graham Strong's recording of The Smugglers is also the highest quality version. Yet, like the previous stories, the Randolph tapes could be a higher quality. Small sections cut from episodes 1, 3 and 4 of The Smugglers exist, due to the censorship in Australia. Interestingly enough, due to the use of location filming, one interested passerby brought their 60mm colour film camera and recorded the production team whilst filming. It's a beautiful insight into the making of the story. Thankfully, a full set of Telly Snaps exist of The Smugglers. There were 3 prints of The Smugglers made. Australia this time returned it to BBC London and Sierra Leone did the same. Singapore's copy is still unknown, but most likely junked. Behind the scenes, things were getting worse for poor Bill Hartnell. William Hartnell's health was deteriorating, and with so many unwelcome changes to the show, he began to grow restless. He was also finding it difficult to find a rapport with the new companions Polly and Ben, played by Annika Wills and Michael Craze. It was during the production of The Smugglers where Innes Lloyd received approval to recast the role of the Doctor, and he sat down with Hartnell to discuss. Bill desperately wanted to complete at least 5 seasons in the role, but knew it wasn't possible, and was reassured the show would be in good hands with Patrick Troughton, an actor he respected. What's the best way to view The Smugglers? As of this video, there has been no official BBC animation, and no episodes survive. The censor clips and on-location footage can be found in the Lost in Time box set. The Smugglers was reconstructed twice by Loose Cannon, LC07 and LC30. The soundtrack, with narration by Annika Wills, was released in 2002. The Smugglers was novelised in 1993. Let's talk censor clips. In the 1960s, and arguably even today, sections of screen media are removed due to being considered offensive. This was common practice in Australia and New Zealand at the time. Doctor Who was no different. For each episode, the section that was considered inappropriate for the viewers was physically cut out from the 16mm film print and spliced back together to hide the cut. In Australia in 1996, Damien Shanahan discovered a wide collection of censor clips from Doctor Who. To gain access to the archive of the Office of Film and Literature Classification, he asked his friend Ellen Parry, who was completing her master's thesis at Griffith University, to write him a letter pretending to be her research assistant. This was to give the illusion he was more than some generic Doctor Who fan, and it actually worked. After trawling through endless files and many dead ends, he finally reached the end of his long journey at the film holdings at Villawood. Since he knew exactly where the clips would have been stored, the staff helped him, and not long later, the clips from missing episodes were being seen for the first time in Australia since they were first cut. Thanks to their hard work, we have glimpses into episodes we thought lost forever. Our 12th missing serial is The 10th Planet. On the snowy plains of Antarctica, invaders from outer space arrive, and the Doctor is dying. But it's far from being all over. Only episode 4 is missing from this serial. So, what does exist? The first 3 episodes exist in the BBC archive as 16mm prints. The regeneration scene, a 30-second segment, exists in the BBC archive thanks to Blue Peter. The highest quality source is Graham Strong's recordings. Interestingly enough, when his tapes were first seen by the restoration team in 1995, they stated at times Graham's recordings were sometimes better than the original soundtracks held by BBC film prints. The 10th Planet Part 2 used Graham's recording for the video release, and some sources say his recordings were used for all 4 parts. Thankfully, a full set of Telly Snaps exists for the 10th Planet. Short off-air recordings exist from episode 4 also. Only 2 prints of the 10th Planet were sent out internationally. Australia returned their copy to the BBC, and Singapore's copy is still unknown. Behind the scenes, the Cybermen were living, while the Doctor was dying. The final serial for William Hartnell was seemingly full of disaster for him. During the filming of episode 2, Bill Hartnell developed bronchitis, which he really didn't have time for that. Episode 3 was amended to give the Doctor's lines to Ben and Barclay. Thankfully, he returned to complete his final episode. The first recorded scene was the regeneration scene, or the renewal. Originally, a cloak was to be placed over Hartnell's face at the end of the 10th Planet, only for it to be taken off during the Power of the Daleks to reveal Patrick Troughton. Shelley Coward, a vision mixer, had a much better idea. By using a malfunctioning mixing desk, she mixed the 2 actors' shots together. This would usually be a simple fade between shots, but because the mixing desk was faulty, it would flare out, essentially filling the image with white, thus creating the regeneration effect that was featured in years to come. A departure party was held at Innes Lloyd's house to say goodbye to William Hartnell, and to celebrate the great, groundbreaking work he created for Doctor Who. What are the ways to watch The 10th Planet? In 2013, The 10th Planet was released on DVD with an official animation by Planet 55 alongside the surviving episodes. An official Telly Snap reconstruction by Ralph Montague was released on this DVD also, and the original VHS. Loose Cannon's reconstructor was completed once in 1998, LCO4. The soundtrack, narrated by Annika Wills, was released in 2004 and re-released in 2006 and 2011. The novelisation was released in 1976. Our 13th missing serial is The Power of the Daleks. On the planet Vulcan, a Dalek ship has been uncovered, found deep below the surface. The Daleks are seemingly willing to be the colony's servants, but all they want is power. Sadly, all episodes are missing from the archive. So, what does exist? Graham Strong once again has the highest quality recording, with David Holman and Richard Landon also have recorded the episode. There are quite a large number of surviving clips for Power of the Daleks due to a variety of different sources. Tomorrow's World contained 2 clips from episode 4. The ABC program Perspectives contained 2 clips also from this episode. Wicker's World contained 40 seconds from episode 5. Perspectives also contained 2 further clips from this episode. A 6-second effects sequence exists from episode 6, which aired in the program Tom Tom. An incomplete trailer exists of episode 1, which goes for 19 seconds. Small clips of off-air recordings exist of episodes 1 and 2 also. Luckily, we also have a full set of Telly Snaps. The amount of clips from this serial shows how impactful this serial was, and it's surprising that it wasn't preserved. 2 prints of The Power of the Daleks were created and shipped to the old favourites, Australia and Singapore. Australia returned their copy and Singapore probably destroyed them. The success of this serial lay on the talents of Patrick Troughton, who was unsure where to go. There are so many ideas of how Troughton should play the Doctor, even whilst filming. There were talks of curly wigs and worse, blackface. Eventually, with the guide of Cindy Newman, they settled on Cosmic Hobo. Cindy Newman also disagreed on how the Doctor was being written and requested rewrites. Thankfully, the scenes that had been filmed already didn't include Troughton himself. Annika Wills and Michael Craze decided to have fun with Troughton in rehearsals by wearing shirts saying, "Come back Bill Hartnell, all is forgiven." When William Hartnell left the role of the Doctor, the audience were unsure. The Power of the Daleks episode 1 received an incredibly low appreciation index of 43 out of 100, peaking at 48 for episode 5. So, how can you watch The Power of the Daleks today? The Power of the Daleks was animated in 2016 by BBC Studios. All 6 episodes are represented and can be purchased on Blu-ray and DVD alongside the surviving footage. A Telesnap reconstruction also exists on this release. Surviving footage was also released on the Lost in Time box set. Loose Cannon released their Power of the Daleks reconstruction in 1999, with rumours of another edition being released. The original audio release was released in 1993 with narration by Tom Baker in character as the Doctor. Ironically, the master tape of this release was lost, and what exists is in low quality. In 2003, they released a new version alongside The Evil of the Daleks with narration by Annika Wills. This story was novelised in 1993. Let's talk telerecordings. When we discuss a Doctor Who film print, you may assume that Doctor Who was shot on film. Sadly, this was not the case. If this was the case, we could have beautiful high-definition copies. So, why do I mention 16mm and 35mm prints throughout this series? Well, this is where it gets a bit confusing. When Doctor Who was filmed in studio, the studio cameras would transmit an electronic signal to the recording bay, and this would be directly recorded onto 2-inch videotape. These videotapes, after being used, would go through a process called telerecording. The most simple way of explaining this is that videotape would be played back through a projector, and a film camera would record the playback, generally on 16mm, sometimes on 35mm. This is how they made copies of the original episode to ship out internationally. After the videotape had exceeded its purpose, it was stored for a while and eventually wiped to be reused. The BBC engineer department assumed that BBC Film Library would keep the telerecordings, making the videotape free to reuse. Location and model recording were generally recorded on film. Location 16mm, model 35mm. Therefore, if original film prints of the location or model work exists, it can be remastered in true high definition. Similar to how the Season 19 Doctor Who Blu-ray is releasing HD footage alongside upscaled standard definition. The location work exists on film and the studio work exists on videotape. Our 14th missing serial is the Highlanders. The Doctor and their friends land in Scotland in 1746. They meet a group of Highlanders and the Doctor offers to help the laird, but unfortunately for them, their kindness gets them into a lot of trouble with the Redcoats. Sadly, all episodes of this serial are missing. So, what does exist? Graham Strong's recording of the Highlanders was missing the final few moments of episode 1, and the surviving part existed in lower quality. But, with the discovery of the Randolph tapes, this is now not the case. Now there is a decent quality version combining both of these tapes. Damien Shanahan's sensor clip discovery also unearthed a few sequences from the Highlanders episode 1. A 10-second 35mm clip exists of the TARDIS door opening and a clapperboard. This was not to be broadcast in the final episode. All telesnaps exist for this story. 4 prints of the Highlanders were created for international viewing. Australia and New Zealand sadly junked their copies. When Philip Morris visited Zambia, they confirmed they did not possess any BBC material. Hong Kong's copy is still up in the air. Behind the scenes, everything was feeling rushed and uncertain. This was the first episode to feature Jamie McCrimmon, but his role of companion was not the original intention. After filming had been completed, Lloyd decided that Jamie should be part of the regular cast, and the final scene was reshot by returning to the original location. So, how can you view the Highlanders today? As of the release of this video, there has been no official Highlanders animation. The surviving clips exist on the Lost in Time box set. The Highlanders was reconstructed twice by Loose Cannon, LC09 and the updated LCs27. An audio release was narrated by Fraser Hines in 2000 and re-released in 2003 and 2011. The novelization was released in 1984. Our 15th missing serial is the Underwater Menace. The TARDIS team stumble upon the underwater city of Atlantis. At the heart of this society, there is an eccentric scientist bent on destroying the world. Can the Doctor stop Professor Zara from draining the Earth's ocean in time? Episodes 1 and 4 are missing from this serial. So, what does exist? Graham Strong's audio recordings are considered the highest quality for the story. David Holman and Richard Landon also have recordings. Episode 3 exists as a 16mm film print in the archive, and Episode 2 joined it in 2011. Since Episode 2 was the Australian print, it contains censor cuts. Thankfully, the censor cuts exist, thanks to Damien Shanahan, which means the episodes were completely restored to their original state. All Telly Snaps for the Underwater Menace exist. 4 prints of the Underwater Menace were created and sent out. Australia returned their prints in 1975. Episode 2, 2011's Recovery, was the Australian copy. This shows that the BBC didn't junk that one. For the other tapes, Zambia doesn't hold any BBC material, New Zealand junked it in 1974, but has it listed on their stocktake in 1970, and Hong Kong's copy is unknown. William Ems originally was commissioned to write a story titled The Imps. During the filming of The Highlanders, Jamie joined the team, and rewrites were required for this story to accommodate him. Ems sadly fell ill and couldn't complete the rewrites in time. William Ems seems to have endless troubles with Doctor Who. Here is Peter Purvis's experience with him in a video responding to part 2 of the series.
And just something I can add to your perception of what it was. Yeah, I was pretty cheesed off when I got the scripts for that, but the reason was that I joined the show only 5 weeks before. It hadn't filtered down to the writer, William Ems, that the part was no longer going to be played by Jacqueline Hill, but it was going to be played by me. I felt quite sorry for the writer, actually, but I gave him a bad time at the time because I didn't know the background to why he hadn't been told. He didn't know that the cast was changing. And of course, the story was already in the schedule, so we had to do it, and he had to readapt his script, taking Jacqueline Hill's lines and giving them to poor old Stephen.
Thank you for sending this video, Peter. So, how can you watch The Underwater Menace today? The Underwater Menace, as of this date, has not been animated. The original intention of the DVD release was to have those episodes animated. The commissioning editor said that the missing episodes had to be completed as a basic Telesnap reconstruction and no more, even though Planet 55, the animation studio, had already entered pre-production. When the restoration team replied, saying they'd be happy to reconstruct a high-quality reconstruction at no higher cost, the commissioning editor replied with a no thanks. Sadly, the final reconstruction on the DVD is incredibly poor, but it is not the restoration team's fault. Loose Cannon released the Underwater Menace LC23 in 2005. The audio release narrated by Annika Wills was released in 2005 also and re-released in 2011. The novelization was released in 1988. Our 16th missing serial is the Moonbase. Earth has conquered the Moon in 2070 and use it as a base for their weather control. Unfortunately for the Earth people, the Cybermen have their sights on their Moonbase and the Earth. Episodes 1 and 3 are missing from the archive. So, what does exist? Graham Strong's audio recordings are considered the best quality for this serial. David Holman and Richard Landon also made recordings. Episodes 2 and 4 exist in the archive. In the early 80s, another copy of episode 4 was discovered and it was a higher quality. Therefore, we have 2 copies of episode 4, 1 copy of episode 2, and everything else is gone. All Telly Snaps exist for this serial. 4 prints of the Moonbase were created. Australia returned their copy in 1975. Zambia doesn't hold any BBC material. Hong Kong probably destroyed the prints. New Zealand mentioned having the serial in their stock take in 1970, but was assumed to be junked in 1974. Interestingly enough, the film can for Moonbase 3 was found in Wellington, New Zealand in 1990. Sadly, it did not contain the episode within. Behind the scenes, it was getting desperate. The Cybermen's first return was made as a pitch for replacing the Daleks, who had lost favour in the public's eye. During the recording of episode 1, the Gravitron prop fell apart and almost hit Patrick Troughton, who was underneath it mere seconds before. During this time, the production of an episode was created a week before broadcast, leaving no room for re-recording if an issue had arose. During the recording of episode 4, the sound equipment picked up an audio from the floor manager's headphones and had to be edited out in post. The Cybermen proved to be a success and cemented the future for the Doctor's villainous cybernetic adversaries. So, what are the ways of watching the Moonbase today? The Moonbase was animated by Planet 55 in 2014 and was released on DVD. The surviving episodes were also released in the Lost in Time box set. Loose Cannon reconstructed the Moonbase in 2002, LC18. An audio soundtrack was released in 2001, narrated by Fraser Hines, and re-released in 2011. The story was novelised as Doctor Who and the Cybermen, released in 1975. Let's talk reconstructions. In 2018, we are so lucky to have various ways of viewing the missing episodes. We have animations, audio releases, novels, and reconstructions. In the past, the access to missing episodes wasn't this easy, so when Richard Landon, whose name you might remember from recording audio of various missing episodes, made one of the first ever reconstructions. After sourcing images from the BBC Photographic Library, which Landon obtained by offering to catalogue their department in exchange for free copies of photographic transparencies, Richard got access to the power of the Dalek Telly Snaps. So he gathered his audio recordings, the Telly Snaps, and a copy of the camera scripts, and he began to work on his reconstruction. By using a setup of 2 cameras, a mixing desk, the original audio tape, and lighting, the first ever reconstruction was born. Since then, reconstructions have evolved and have become even more complex. The most notable group of reconstructors are Loose Cannon. In 1996, Loose Cannon was founded, and their first reconstruction was released in 1997, and it was the Macra Terror. Our 17th missing serial is the Macra Terror. The Doctor and friends land on another idyllic Earth colony in the distant future. On first glance, it appears to be a happy holiday camp, yet it soon becomes clear it's far from that. Sadly, all 4 episodes are missing from the BBC archive. So, what does exist?
Macra do not exist! There are no Macra!
Graham Strong's audio is considered the highest. David Holman and Richard Landon also made recordings. Censor clips from episode 2 and 3 exist, which gives an interesting insight into how the Macra moves and looks in the final product. Off-air recordings of episode 3 also exists. We are lucky to have all Telly Snaps existing for this story also. 4 prints of the Macra Terror were made and sent out. Australia and New Zealand junked their copies in the mid-70s. Zambia doesn't hold any BBC material, and Hong Kong remains mysterious. A new title sequence for the Doctor came late, but was worth the wait. The new titles were created by the original titles designer, Bernard Lodge. The addition of the Doctor's face within the sequence was originally going to be done for the first ever title sequence, which Verity Lambert, the original producer, found too terrifying. Innes Lloyd, however, liked it. Originally, these new titles were supposed to debut with the Underwater Menace, but that didn't come to pass. The Macra prop was so large and cumbersome, it had to be mounted to a van in order for it to move. The production team were very upset with the final product of the Macra prop by Shawcraft Models, and this started the beginning of the end of their association with Doctor Who. So, how can you watch the Macra Terror? An official animation by BBC Studios was released in March in 2019 and can be viewed on either DVD, digital, or Blu-ray. The surviving clips were originally released on the Lost in Time box set. The Macra Terror was reconstructed as LC01 and was remade in 2006 as LC24. The original audio release was narrated by Colin Baker in 1992 and was re-released and remastered in 2000. In 2012, Annika Wills recorded a new version of this story. The Macra Terror was novelised in 1987. Our 18th missing serial is the Faceless Ones. Arriving back on Earth on the 20th of July 1966, the TARDIS team end up on a runway at Gatwick Airport. They uncover the mystery of missing students who seem to board an airplane but never come off. Sadly, only 2 episodes out of 6 exist in the BBC archive. So, what does exist? Graham Strong's audio recordings are considered to be the highest quality. Holman and Landon also recorded this story. Episode 1 and 3 exist in the archive. Episode 3 is sadly damaged in quite a few places, and an estimated 19 seconds are missing from the episode. Thanks to the restoration team, the episode used Graham Strong's tapes to restore the soundtrack, and the 19 seconds of missing footage were recreated using CGI and cutaways. Off-air recordings of episode 2 exist, which goes for 3 seconds. Thankfully, a full set of Telly Snaps exist. 4 prints of the Faceless Ones were created. Australia's copy was returned to the BBC in 1975. The surviving episodes 1 and 3 could possibly be these copies. Zambia doesn't have it, New Zealand returned it, and Hong Kong hasn't been confirmed yet. Sadly, it wasn't only the students disappearing, but the Doctor's friends, Polly and Ben. The Faceless Ones was originally envisioned as a 4-parter, but was extended to be a 6-parter. This was troublesome with Annika and Michael's contracts, which were supposed to end in 8 episodes, meaning their final episode would now be episode 2 of The Evil of the Daleks. It was decided instead they would be paid in full for episodes 1 and 2 of Evil without using their services. Also being cut from Doctor Who was Shawcraft Models, after delivering a model satellite that didn't work correctly. From here on, they enlisted the services of the BBC Visual Effects department. So, how can you experience this serial today? As of this release, The Faceless Ones has not been officially animated. The surviving episodes have been remastered and re-released in the Lost in Time box set. Loose Cannon reconstructed The Faceless Ones twice, LC02 and LC37. An audio release was narrated by Fraser Hines in 2002 and re-released in 2012. The novelization was released in 1987. Our 19th missing serial is The Evil of the Daleks. The Daleks have a scheme that will ensure the continuous supremacy over the universe. Yet, they need the Doctor's help to do it. Jamie also begins to lose faith in the Doctor. Sadly, only episode 2 exists in the BBC archive. So, what does exist? Graham Strong's audio recordings are considered the best, and Holman and Landon also have recordings. Episode 2 exists in its entirety thanks to Gordon Hendry's 16mm film print. A part of episode 7's model sequences exist, but are believed to contain footage that wasn't used in the final edit. All 7 episodes Telly Snaps exist, and 26 additional off-screen photographs by Chris Thompson, who was the production designer of Evil of the Daleks, also exist, many of which are almost identical to John Cura's Telly Snaps. 2 photos from episode 6 were taken by Gordon Langdon, and 3 were taken by fan Terry Reason. 3 prints of The Evil of the Daleks were made. Australia returned their copy to BBC London. Episode 2 from the archive is more likely this version. Singapore's copy is unknown, and New Zealand junked theirs. Terry Nation, meanwhile, had other plans for the Daleks. At this time, Terry Nation pitched his Dalek spin-off to the BBC, which denied his proposal and decided to push for American backing. For him to do that, the BBC decided to move the Daleks out of the program and give them their final ends. Sidney Newman suggested that they don't completely destroy all the Daleks and leave a hint that maybe one survives, just in case they wish to bring them back to the series in the future. How can you view this serial today? The Evil of the Daleks, as of this video, has not been animated. Episode 2 can be seen in the Lost in Time box set. Loose Cannon's Evil of the Daleks was released as LC31. An audio version was released in 1992, narrated by Tom Baker, with the music by the Beatles being edited out due to copyright fees. In 2003, Fraser Hines recorded new narration, and the song Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen was cleared for use. It was re-released in 2004 and 2012. The Evil of the Daleks was novelised in 1993. Let's talk loose cannon reconstructions. In the last episode, we discussed reconstructions in their infancy. let's discuss the making of one of the most ambitious reconstructions by the Loose Cannon team, The Evil of the Daleks. Due to the high amount of action in this serial, there were many scenes where a Telly Snap just couldn't explain what was going on. Some scenes missed Telly Snaps altogether, so it was up to the Loose Cannon team to approach reconstructing the serial in a new way. Dean Rose, a member of Loose Cannon, went along to Grimm's Dyke, which is a house in Harrow where the original episode was filmed, to take some reference shots with permission from the owners. The owners had an interest in film and television history, and when Dean asked if they could bring a Dalek along to film some shots, they happily agreed. Russ Port's wife, Julie, played the part of Victoria, donning a wig.
Wig? Did you just say wig? Yes.
Found last minute at a general shop, and a borrowed outfit with sofa trim to make it fit. The scene was matched with the original Telly Snap that exists. The wallpaper from the Telly Snap had been removed over time and was edited back in with Adobe After Effects. This type of dedication to reconstructing is why many view Loose Cannon as the best way to view missing Doctor Who episodes. Our 20th missing serial is The Abominable Snowman. High up in the Himalayas, a man is killed by an impossible creature, which starts off a chain of events that will begin a lifelong feud for the Doctor and the Great Intelligence. Sadly, only episode 2 exists in the archive. So, what still exists? Graham Strong's audio recordings are considered the highest quality. David Holman and Richard Landon also have recordings. Episode 2 exists from a 16mm film print borrowed by Ian Levine, which was found by Roger Stevens in 1982. Ian Levine bought this episode along with Moonbase 4, Invasion of the Dinosaurs 1 and Space Museum 1, and other non-Doctor Who prints for £25. The location filming 16mm film also exists, which is a much higher quality than the original print. It also contains a bit of material that wasn't included in the final edit, such as a shot of Deborah Watling falling over. Late Night Lineup, a BBC programme, contained 2 shots from this story also. Gerald Blake, the director of The Abominable Snowman, recorded some 8mm colour footage of behind the scenes on location. Thankfully, all Telly Snaps exist for the serial. 4 prints of The Abominable Snowman were made. Australia returned theirs, Nigeria's fate is unknown, New Zealand junked theirs in 74, and Zambia doesn't have any BBC material. Behind the scenes, the crew were changing again. Peter Bryant took over as script editor in Tomb of the Cybermen, eventually to take role of producer from The Web of Fear to The Space Pirates. Due to the fact that season 4 was recorded a week before transmission, they decided to record episodes 1 and 2 of the serial 2 days in a row. Now there would be a 3-week gap between production and transmission. The Yeti, developed by writers Mervyn Haseman and Henry Lincoln, were an instant success, and its sequel, The Web of Fear, was put into pre-production during the production of episode 4 of The Abominable Snowman. How can you view The Abominable Snowman today? As of this video, this episode is not being officially animated by the BBC. The surviving episode 2 is released on the Lost in Time DVD box set alongside the remaining footage. Loose Cannon reconstructed this episode in 2006 under LC25. The soundtrack by Fraser Hines was released in 2001 and has been re-released in 2003 and 2012. The story was novelised in 1974. Our 21st missing serial is The Ice Warriors. The TARDIS arrives during an ice age on planet Earth. Buried within the ice stands an imposing figure made of armour never seen before, yet the creature within isn't as dormant as it may seem. Sadly, episodes 2 and 3 are missing from the archive. So, what does exist? Graham Strong's recordings are considered the highest quality. Landon and Holman also recorded these episodes. Episodes 1, 4, 5 and 6 exist in the archives since 1988. Thankfully, all Telly Snaps exist. 5 prints of the Ice Warriors were made, and we have a new player in the mix, Germany. But don't get too excited, it was an audition print to see if Germany liked Doctor Who. Turns out they didn't, and they rejected the series. The print's fate is unknown though. Australia returned their copy, Singapore's fate is unknown, New Zealand's copy was either returned or junked, and Zambia hasn't got any BBC material. The Ice Warriors originally looked quite different. Trying to emulate the success of the Daleks and the Cybermen, a new recurring villain was brainstormed. Originally, the Ice Warriors were to be cybernetic Vikings, but the costume designer envisioned them as reptilian. The director agreed with this idea. So, How can you watch The Ice Warriors today? The Ice Warriors was animated and released on DVD in 2013. The animation was completed by Curios Entertainment. An official cut-down hybrid reconstruction of episodes 2 and 3 were made by Ralph Montague for the original VHS release, and is available on the DVD release also. The story was reconstructed by Loose Cannon in 2004 under LC21. In 2005, a soundtrack was narrated by Fraser Hines and re-released in 2012. The story was novelized in 1976. Our 22nd missing serial is The Web of Fear. The Doctor encounters the Great Intelligence and the terrifying Yeti once again. This time, it is in the London Underground. The Doctor must align with armed forces in order to contain the unearthly threat. Episode 3 is the only missing episode. So, what does exist? Graham Strong's audio recordings are considered the highest quality. Landon and Holman also recorded this story. All Telly Snaps exist, along with the censor clips from episodes 2, 4 and 5, which are now considered not missing. 4 prints of The Web of Fear were made. Australia returned theirs to the BBC. Zambia doesn't own any BBC material. New Zealand junked their copy, but still had censor clips from it. In 2011, Philip Morris found all 6 parts of The Web of Fear. That's right, all 6. He gained permission to return the episodes to the BBC, but just before shipment, episode 3 went missing. Philip Morris believes that it was sold in a private sale. Sadly, as of this date, episode 3 has not been recovered. This is also why there was a big gap between finding the episodes and announcing them to the public, due to Philip believing he could gain access to the 3rd episode. For this story, the Yeti costumes were remade from scratch. This was due to the production team now deeming the original design not to be terrifying enough. The general concept is still there, just slightly streamlined. They now have glowing eyes, new claws, and a refined silhouette. They also gained a roar sound effect, which was lacking in the Abominable Snowman. Extensive location filming was considered for The Web of Fear at London's Natural History Museum and in the London Underground. Both didn't pan out for reasons of cost or straight up refusal. The Underground was faithfully recreated in studio, so much so that they received complaints from London Transport, who thought they filmed there anyway without permission. Deborah Watling also expressed her interest in departing the series during the production of this serial. So, what are the ways of viewing The Web of Fear today? The Web of Fear episode 3 has not been officially animated by the BBC. The surviving episodes were released on the Web of Fear DVD in 2014. The Loose Cannon Web of Fear reconstruction was completed in late 2011, the same time Philip Morris found the surviving episodes. It was LC35. The audio reading was completed in 2000 by Fraser Hines. It was re-released in 2003 and 2012. The novel was released in 1976. Let's talk recovery. In 1977, 206 episodes from the first 6 years of Doctor Who were missing from the archive. Sue Malden was appointed as archive selector at the Film and Videotape Library, and she chose Doctor Who as her project. Once she saw the state of the archive, she worked to find anything of Doctor Who that she could. She found a whole bunch of videotape master copies and managed to find every Pertwee episode, not all of them in colour though. Ian Levine found 79 episodes in the Villiers House archive in London, allegedly before they were set to be junked. Sue also contacted the BFI and gained access to a few episodes from there. Further discoveries were also made this year, making the original missing episode count of 206 to 136. Since then, we have lowered that number to 97. 44 Hartnell episodes and 53 Troughton episodes are missing from the archive. Our 23rd missing serial is Fury from the Deep. The Doctor and friends encounter a refinery base. A curious sound is heard in the pipes. Inside, what may appear to be ordinary seaweed contains a deadly secret, one that could destroy everyone in the base. Sadly, all episodes of this serial are missing. So, what does exist? Graham Strong's audio recordings are considered the highest quality. Holman and Landon also recorded this story. 19 seconds from episode 1 exist, due to it being reused in the War Games. Censor clips from episodes 2, 4 and 5 also exist. In 2003, 3 minutes and 32 seconds of film trims were discovered, but the footage contains unused takes, but are a good indication of what it could have looked like. Tony Cornell, who recorded The Last Dalek during Evil of the Daleks, also shot some silent 8mm footage, which goes for roughly 4 minutes. All Telly Snaps exist from this serial. 4 prints of Fury from the Deep were created. Australia and New Zealand junked theirs, although New Zealand kept their censor clips. Gibraltar's copy was most likely returned after broadcast. During the serial, Peter Bryant took over the role of producer, and Derek Sherwin became story editor. This serial also debuts the sonic screwdriver. In the original script, it was just an ordinary screwdriver, but Michael Bryant, a production assistant, suggested the idea of the sonic screwdriver. This was the final episode for Deborah Watling, who made her exit at the end of episode 6. So, how can you view Fury from the Deep today? As of this video, Fury from the Deep has not been animated. The surviving clips are available on the Lost in Time DVD box set. Loose Cannon has reconstructed Fury from the Deep as LC-22. The original audio narration by Tom Baker was released in 1993, and in 2004 a remastered version by Fraser Hines was made. The novel was released in 1986. Our 24th missing serial is The Wheel in Space. The Doctor and Jamie contact a space station known as the Wheel. Little do they know, the Cybermen are watching and intend to use the Wheel as a beacon for their invasion fleet. Sadly, only episodes 3 and 6 survive of this serial. So, what does exist? Graham Strong has the highest quality audio recording, and Holman and Landon also recorded this serial. Episode 3 exists as a 16mm print, and episode 6 exists as a 35mm print. Censor clips from episode 4 exist from the Australian archives, whereas the censor clips from episode 5 come from New Zealand. The latter were discovered in 2002, which was held in private hands. All Telly Snaps exist from this serial. 4 prints of The Wheel in Space were made. Australia and New Zealand junked theirs, Nigeria's fate is unknown, and Gibraltar probably returned it to the BBC after broadcast. The original concept for The Wheel in Space was quite different to the end result. Originally, the concept of this story was to have a Cybermen vs Dalek serial, but the idea was vetoed by Terry Nation, who had the first right of refusal for any Dalek script idea. This serial introduced Wendy Padbury into the role of Zoe Herriot, the latest travelling friend of the Doctor. During the recording of episode 3, the sound box that was used to record the Cybermen lines broke down, which means they had to remount the cliffhanger sequence the week later. How can you experience The Wheel in Space today? The Wheel in Space Episode 1 has been animated officially by the BBC as a special feature for the Missing Believes Wipe event. It is believed this is to be a special feature for the Macroterra release, but as of this video being created, it has not been confirmed yet. The surviving episodes were released in the Lost in Time box set. An official reconstruction was released by BritBox, but received mixed reviews due to its lack of CGI compared to the Loose Cannon reconstruction. Praise was given to the high quality Telly Snaps and remastered audio. Wheel in Space was reconstructed by Loose Cannon in 2011 under LC-34. An audio release, narrated by Wendy Padbury, was released in May 2004. The novelisation was released in 1988. Our 25th missing serial is The Invasion. The Doctor joins his friend, Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart. They discover a plot involving the Cybermen. They plan to use handheld radios distributed by International Electromatics to hypnotise the people of Earth. Sadly, episode 1 and 4 are missing from the archive. So, what does exist? For the first time in a while, the highest quality recordings was not made by Graham Strong. It was made by an off-air recording in Australia. The identity of the recorder is unknown, but is assumed to be Australian due to the continuity announcements being made in an Australian accent. Yet sadly, no Telly Snaps exist for this story. 3 prints of The Invasion were created and sent out. Australia returned theirs to the BBC, Singapore's fate is unknown, and Gibraltar most likely returned it to the BBC after broadcast. Behind the scenes, the producers were discussing changing Doctor Who forever. Peter Bryant and Derek Sherwin discussed the idea of doing more Earth-based stories, especially due to the success of The Web of Fear. The Invasion was to be considered a test pilot for this idea, with the intention of making Season 7 based solely on Earth. During this time, Patrick Troughton decided Season 6 would be his final season, and asked Fraser Hines to stay so they could leave together, despite Fraser's agent telling him to leave earlier. Nicholas Courtney was offered a more permanent role as the Brigadier in the next season, which he agreed to instantly. So, How can you watch The Invasion today? The Invasion was animated by Cosgrove Hall in 2006. In 1993, the VHS contained video links, similar to the ones from The Crusade. This time, it included actor Nicholas Courtney, who explained what happened in the missing episodes. This is also available on the DVD release. Loose Cannon released The Invasion in 2003 under LC-19. The audio was released in 2004, narrated by Fraser Hines. It was re-released in 2006 and 2012. The novelization was released in 1985. Let's talk animations. In recent years, Doctor Who's missing episodes have started to become officially animated by the BBC, which for many fans has been a welcome way of representing the missing episodes. Let's take a look back to the first officially animated episode of Doctor Who, The Invasion, from 2006. James Goss had approached Cosgrove Hall, who had made Doctor Who Scream of the Shauker, and asked if they were interested in doing a black and white animation. The original edit that was delivered was deemed to have too many impressive camera shots and special effects that just would not have been possible to do in the 1960s. Therefore, they were recommissioned to make changes to match more of the original style, but these were only a few minor changes. Upon its release, it was heavily popular, yet it wasn't another 6 years until the BBC attempted another official animation. The Reign of Terror was animated by Planet 55 and released in January 2013. Later that year in August, The Ice Warriors was released, animated by Curious Entertainment. The 10th Planet was also released and animated by Planet 55 in October. The next year, the Moonbase was animated by Planet 55 and was released in January. These previous stories fell under the 2 or less missing episodes banner, which led to many people wondering why the Underwater Menace and the Crusade were never animated, due to the fact they only had 2 episodes missing each. 2 years later, BBC Studios started completing a Doctor Who animation almost yearly, starting with The Power of the Daleks in 2016. This marked the first time a full serial was animated, without any surviving episodes. Shada, an incomplete episode not technically missing, was animated in 2017, and The Macra Terror was animated in 2019. Our 26th and final missing episode is The Space Pirates. A space beacon is about to be blown apart by a few space pirates, intent on stealing a mineral kept on it. Unfortunately for the Doctor and friends, they have just landed in the detonation zone. Only episode 2 survives of the serial. So, what does exist? Similar to The Invasion, the highest quality recording was made by an unidentified Australian. Before you ask, it wasn't me. Holman and Landon also made recordings. Episode 2 exists in a 35mm film negative. The episode itself was shot on 35mm film, and it was kept due to its cultural significance. A reel of 35mm film sequences exist for episodes 1 and 2. Sadly, no Telly Snaps exist for this story. 3 prints of the Space Pirates were sent out. Australia returned theirs, Singapore most likely destroyed them, and Zambia does not contain any BBC material. It would seem that the Space Pirates was doomed from the very beginning. The destruction of the Space Pirates was almost foreshadowed. During the processing of the film, a small section was damaged. The scene was remounted soon after. Luckily, it only required Patrick Troughton, supervised by special effects designer John Wood. Interestingly, an uncredited floor assistant by the name of John Nathan Turner worked on the story, who had some impact on the future of the program. Wendy Padbury sent me this video about this story.
An actor called Esmond Knight, who I distinctly remember because Edmund had a false eye. His party trick was to take that false eye out and sort of put it on the table in front of you, so when you were about to do a scene and you were supposed to be rummaging to find something on the desk, you'd come across his eye. So that was one thing I clearly remember.
Thank you Wendy, Ben, and Phantom Films for sending me this video. How can you view The Space Pirates today? The Space Pirates has not been officially animated by the BBC, and episode 2 exists on the Lost in Time box set. The Space Pirates was reconstructed by Loose Cannon as LC-28 in 2007. The audio release was narrated by Fraser Hines and released in 2003. The novel was released in 1990. So, that was the black and white era. But what about the colour era? Today, we will discuss the Pertwee missing episodes. But I bet you're asking out loud to your screen, but Josh, I have all the Pertwee episodes on DVD. Well, you're not wrong. A few Pertwee episodes do not exist in their original colour format. There are two ways of returning the original colour to these images. Some of these missing colour stories exist in a low quality colour videotape. By pairing the colour signal from these videotapes with the high quality black and white film recordings, a colour version can exist. The stories in your home media releases that use this technique are Doctor Who and the Silurians, Terror of the Autons, The Daemons, and The Time Monster. Colour recovery seems almost like magic. Chroma dots are an artifact that exists when displaying an unfiltered analog colour signal on a black and white monitor, which are found from recordings that were originally made in colour. They are able to extract the colour signal from these chroma dots and recover the colour that is missing to varying degrees of success. This process was used for the Ambassadors of Death, The Mind of Evil, Planet of the Daleks, and the Invasion of the Dinosaurs. Episode 1 of Invasion of the Dinosaurs only contains colour information from red and green, and not blue. Therefore, the colour version on your DVD is enabled as a special feature, due to it not being at a high standard compared to the other releases. Episode 1 of The Mind of Evil contained no colour information, therefore it was manually colorised by Stuart Humphreys and Peter Crocker. So, there we have it. The conclusion of this 9-part investigation into the missing episodes of Doctor Who. But what does the future hold for these beloved tales? Film stock doesn't last forever if stored incorrectly, and it will eventually deteriorate. The missing episodes tale can sometimes be sad and discouraging, but it's really a story of fan communities at their best. Eccentric Doctor Who fans who aimed their 8mm cameras at their television set, who told their parents to keep quiet whilst they recorded the audio, pretending to be researchers to gain access to censor clips, spending months and years painstakingly recreating these stories for reconstructions, animating these adventures and screening them on a cinema screen. To all these crazy Doctor Who nuts, we owe so much, who we all should be eternally grateful for. Thank you. Thank you for watching this 9-part series. It's been a crazy few weeks. Thank you all for your comments, positive and otherwise. I've loved having an entire forum thread analysing my stupid gay voice. I've smiled at every comment that's been posted, and receiving a video from Peter Purvis and Wendy Padbury. This is only the beginning. There are so many stories about the history of Doctor Who to be told, and it's far from being all over. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on Twitter.